Dishonoring yourself is a delusion because the whole spirit, Kisimanatu, as we call him, will still understand what the real truth is, even if we deny that truth. And I think that's kind of where we're pushing ourselves back. Like, I believe that the Great Spirit, Kisimanatu, is always trying to push us back to the one truth. And we hear about that in the Bible as well, like the one truth that it talks about. And, we just have so many of these false narratives. And I believe that that's where we're going. I feel like almost a force is trying to push us back to that whole rounded being where we can honor the ugly, the big, the bad, the ugly, and that our leaders can do that too.
Into the fire, here we go. Into the fire, head to toe. Into the fire to be seen. Into the fire to be.
This is Mark A. Lewis. This is the Sacred Village podcast. I'm here with my good friend Will Bear. He's coming in from Calgary, University of Calgary. Is that correct?
Yes.
Very glad to have you here, Will. We're ceremony friends. I wanted to acknowledge too that I'm staring at a green light once again. This is podcast number 3 with video. Still getting used to that. I can stare at this green light all day long and it's not getting me any closer to the feeling of being connected to whoever will be hearing this, which I was explaining earlier is just a little bit of it's a bit of a bump for me. Like there's some artifice, but it's also challenging my ability to be in a state of play. Because it is, right? It's like acting. It's like this state of, play, of being creative and just being with what is and pretending, and while also trying to maintain something true. So staying tethered to my heart, and I can do that. It's difficult for me to do that at the best of times. Like it is a practice of mine to maintain that connection. My nervous system gets in the way. I have a sensitive nervous system and I have a human nervous system. I think everybody has to deal with, contend with that human condition, like that body that we walk around in and all of the different aspects at play all of the time. Like it's mind boggling when you really start to break it down. What's at play? Like I remember I was doing a fast and I had this insight around how many insects, microscopic, are covering our body all the time. It's like a horror film all the time, every second of every day. We don't think about that, but that's just like scratching the surface in terms of the complexity of the universe that our body is, a reflection of the complexity of the universe outside. We have that right here in front of us. But anyways, digressing already. Yeah, Will, thank you so much for joining. Can you give us an introduction about yourself? We can start with a brief introduction, just sort of like broad strokes, and then we're going to go a little bit deeper, like a surgeon.
Sounds good. All right. Sante William Masquan Tsigasin. I'm from Flying Disc First Nation 36. I'm a Cree and Belarusian. So I'm a descendant of Warren Residential School, second generation in Canada from my Belarusian side. I'm a second year sociology student. And my spirit name is Wichonki Omani Hokchina, which means boy who walks among the stars, given to me by the Lakota during our Sundance. So I'm a second year sociology student. Recovering addicts from drugs and alcohol and medication. So this will be my 19 months, on the 25th. Yeah, so kind of that's where I'm at right now with my introduction.
We've read the back of the book. Now we're going to open it up. And, we'll just get into, we shared, when we shared that teepee in ceremony, you have a lot of knowledge. You carry a lot of knowledge for a young man and a lot of life experience also. So getting into sociology, we cracked that, the lid on that can of worms and we got into it a little bit. There's so much to navigate there. It feels like such a beautiful and profoundly important area for somebody to be delving into and to keep an eye on the macro, on the sociological aspects, the patterns, what are we seeing, what can we learn? Can you delve into that a little bit? I want to know about, that vocation that you're striving towards, if you have that in mind.
Just to go back a tiny bit, just to state, I was a placement coordinator for 7.5 years working underneath Synovus Energies, and I staffed up to 12 oil camps before the 2018 oil recession. And I managed their training budget for Indigenous people. And that's kind of where I've seen, not just within myself as an Indigenous person, but other people, the struggle of not getting anywhere, even though we were getting money, dealing with their traumas, trying to heal ourselves with the consumer society, which would be buying a bunch of stuff. I had a big house, a big car, things like that, but I felt really empty inside, and I was just perpetuating a cycle, right? And I seen that happen a lot, and it actually took some lives in the oil fields while I was working, and that's what made me want to switch my career, because it wasn't a matter of how I was reorganizing things like logistics and placement and ratios that was going to fix this issue. It was working with the person. So I wanted to become a psychologist, but Creator had a different path for me, and I'm really glad Creator did. So I got honors at Mount Royal University and came to sociology. As I'm moving forward and when we're talking about the energies, we're trying to calm them and bring them into
Mm,
this.
hmm.
When I got into sociology, it really expanded my mind, but it was also healing as well, because being an Indigenous male, I didn't get to know any. I'm a product of assimilation. My grandparents came from the Beauval Indian Residential School, or else from the escapees of Belarus during World War II. And I didn't really get to know anything about them because the church had both of them, whether they were Belarusian or not, changed their name to English names. And we just kind of let go of the culture. So I didn't really know much about it till I came to university and started studying the Indigenous aspects, started studying about our history, the politics, legal studies, all of this stuff kind of came into play. It was really fascinating for me. And so I started doing research at the municipal archives about water policies and stuff like that and politics. And I started diving into more with sociology, but like the dissociology part of it, where we're dissociating parts of society, parts of ourselves, how to bring that into play. So
Hmm.
so the dissociation part was a big factor. Learning a lot about white collar psychopathy and political process was a big one. Water protection, and also sociopolitical verisimilitude, which means like truth likeness. So we're always spinning a lie around the truth, but verisimilitude, always creating a false truth, things like that. So I started getting into all these aspects because it really related to me as a child growing up. I grew up with parents that were in addictions, were taken from me, and addictions pretty young, and always being gaslit by a world. The world always, my world anyways, it always told me as a child I was wrong. And I was being told this by unregulated adults. And it did a lot of damage to me. Being gaslit growing up, not thinking had a place in society, or, you felt weird. So it kind of started all the way back there, talking about my perspective on life now goes that the child is the sacred, the one next to godly, and it's us, the adults, who have lost our way. And I know that because I'd gone through my addiction, and coming into recovery and finding Creator again, brought me back to that path where I know now that a lot of adults don't have it right, and a lot of political processes don't have it right. And when we're talking about something like bringing back the sacred village, understanding the history of how things happened, how land claims came to be, how all these things came to be, it's really exciting to me. Any of that, does that kind of grasp a little bit of what you were asking?
We can get awfully close to the title, and you asked me about that before we started, The Sacred Village. It seems to me that the work you're doing is work on exactly that, trying to help
Oh,
everybody, help as many people who are willing or interested in leveling up in that regard, creating a way of living of community that's closer to the sacred, that's closer to being, community cohesion. And there's self-actualization, community actualization, and cultural continuity. That's like, there's a pyramid I was shown by a Blackfoot elder. He did a lecture on that, and it was actually, it was beautiful. It was profound, and it stuck with me just as like those stepping stones. But we do have to start with the self. We have to start with that self-actualization piece first. So going back to when you were young and when you were being lied to, there's a word that you use that I'm familiar with the word written, but I don't know that I've heard it much because I can't kind of conjure it.
Versimilitude. So so like it's like a verse, and then the militude is kind of like a measurement, and it means
Mm,
truth likeness. So almost
mm,
like the truth, but not quite. And I think that a lot of us, we want this, we fantasize about things to disconnect from things, but there's also a concept of deconnecting, like unconnecting completely. And when we connect in completely, we're still connecting to something in life and this force and this energy. And a lot of people deconnect in politics or procedures, and we get sped a lot of like it's really interesting about listening to the debate. Like, no, I'm right because and I think another big part of that is listening to what's not spoken in a lot of debates. What like is I'm researching things like my biggest research right now is fluoride. So That's where I spend a lot of time researching that debate. And it brings up a lot of interesting concepts of things that aren't being spoken about. And when we're just focusing on one narrow vision and what they call it is like we make it so urgent. Like, no, it's so urgent that you understand it has to be this way. And I just remember that way too. It's almost like it's fear driven, a concept that people have to be right, they have to be empowered, and they have to be in control. But they're choking out creation in the process of this fear, right? And they're connecting to something else rather than, the gentle spirits, the gentle light that, like creation is still going to keep moving forward. It's going to still keep growing. All you have to do is allow it. You just have to let go, just chill out, not just our political procedures, but in our family. Because as a child growing up, I felt very smothered, very choked out, very, I had to reach some like some pedestal growing up as a child that I wasn't set up for. I grew up with parents that were more like, do as I say, not as I do. And it's very confusing for a child. It's very confusing for a society. And so that's kind of where when I talk about sociopolitical verisimilitude, I think about things that are so close to the truth, but they're not quite. It's almost anybody can debate, like, okay, for example, fluoride is good for you for set examples, but I kind of like what a professor wrote when he was like, it's kind of like a bargaining, it's kind of like a bet. You put your best bet down on these facts and you narrow the consumption down so little that it barely makes an effect that you can barely see, and like kind of like a big lie versus a small lie. But if you have a bunch of small lies, you can kind of keep people within that aspect, within the blinders. You're keeping people within the blinders as long as it's believable. And I think when we study verisimilitude, we kind of have to understand what drives make belief, because adults play make belief a lot, probably as much as kids, if not more. And just keeping ourselves, what is the truth? And like the truth to me is that children are sacred, that the land is sacred, creator is sacred, and that everything works perfectly without us interfering in it, without us creating false value from it. I don't know. So I think that's kind of where I'm going with these understandings, but I'm still very young in it. But I mean, going back to what you were saying, like, I really like what you said. That's why it really stuck out to me that you said sacred and then village, because it's a two so powerful word. When we get to the core concept of the truth, the sacred, the village, and then what is it? Like, what's the difference? What are we doing that's causing this desecration of creation? What is causing this? Is it our anger? Is it our fear? Is it monopoly, or is it this? And just asking ourselves these questions as we're moving forward, because at the end of the day, it is about reconnection, and I think we've heard that word a lot. Reconnecting to each other, ourselves, our village, and pulling ourselves up and understanding at the end of the day the truth. Yeah, it's gonna take the truth, the harsh truth. And I think too, sorry, I'm just gonna build a little bit on that. Because I am an addict, the harsh truth is still a truth, and it comes from spiritual starvation, our actions. When we're studying things, when I'm studying things like incarceration rates or things like that, mass incarceration in Canada, these numbers of sexual assault, things like that, this is a reaction, and it needs to be looked at as a normal, understood reaction, like a natural reaction, because the numbers are too huge to state. This is a choice. This is how people want to be. It's not really from something like that. I think we need to start talking about it in our village, because this is how we corrected things a long time ago. Was we were self-regulating. We were a self-regulating people, as we had our Indigenous tribes, as we had our small tribes, we were self-regulating, and we need to kind of get back to that point, instead of condemning the condemned, and incarcerating all these problems and stuff, and not looking at it like it's there's a natural reaction for these like absurd numbers of incarcerations, things like that, and addictions, because I was that person. I was a person who was driven by my hunger, driven by my starvation, and I was trying to heal myself with the wrong medicines, my drugs, my addiction, my pill, everything that was given to me by the complexity of a consumer construct, and none of it worked until we found something that was sacred, and a village, something like Sundance, something like culture, something like community.
You kind of nailed it. I guess now we get to figure out what the next step is, because there's a lot of people on the planet, the verisimilitude, I think, of Donald Trump, because he looks, and it's kind of a bad example in a way, but I've always thought, like, in a B movie, he could reflect healthy masculinity, because he's clear, he makes decisions, he's fearless, he says that he has these values and those values, and he's in there to save the day, and in Israel and all the things, but And that's why I emphasize B movie, because it's not a sophisticated movie to be able to see that it's close to the truth. But to some people, it does resemble that. It is enough for them. It is healthy masculinity, and he does actually contain certain traits, certain masculine traits, which is he's his own person. Like there is an autonomous person there. I don't know how managed he is. You know, he has his mythology that he works from, obviously. But when he's sitting at a table, he's not persuaded by shame. He'll combat shame with more shame, and he'll make remarks that show his vulnerability. But he moves on so quickly, and it doesn't seem to faze him or manipulate his or change his trajectory. So if only he was an elder that had values that were connected to the sacred, and he was unshakable in the same regard. So he's showing something that people have not seen in a long time, in my opinion, in relation to many other politicians. He's showing something that other politicians don't have, which is authenticity. You know, has been groomed in a particular way that is not, it's not in anyone's best interest other than his own. But he has a certain kind of strength in his ability to not be persuaded by any guilt or shame. Or in the case of other politicians, and I don't know, there's a plasticity that comes with politicians that I've seen in the past, at least recently. You know, I'm not an expert in politics, and there are certain politicians that are remembered, and they stand out, and it's the ones who have more authenticity than the others, in my opinion. Like they have more strength of character as opposed to strength of ideology that doesn't go any deeper than that. Where Donald Trump kind of, you know, to the untrained eye, in my opinion, kind of looks like he might have those characteristics. It's a versimilitude. It's not the thing. It's the B movie version of the real thing. So, anyways, I want, yeah, I mean, yeah, go ahead and speak on that. You know, that's kind of maybe there's something there, but
Yeah, no, I really like that part because I think the whole world is studying Donald Trump. And actually, I learned a lot about
yeah,
in my own life because they started using psychology to understand Donald Trump in an aspect of malignant narcissism. And when I was reading Malignant Narcissism, I was like, oh my gosh, like I know this person in my life, right? I think a lot of people have a person like that in their life. And Donald Trump is pretty unique, I suppose, in his own one way. Like, even if he doesn't use, I don't really know, you know, what his background is. I only see his face. But the biggest thing for me about this big aspect is, I don't know what drives him behind the scenes because I know that a man with a lot of fame, who's done a lot of terrible things in the past, could have a lot of potential blackmail, which would make our leader weak. And I think we looked out for that in the past. Another thing too, we never had leaders who had no honor. And I think this is spoken about in Japan, Indigenous culture, and a lot of cultures. We always talked about honor. You need to be able to, and I think to get into a more complex state of honor, I think there is people who can honor, they can honor things in a good light. I just personally, for me, I remember when I was in my addictions and stuff, I would have to lie in order to make my story at one point sound worse than it was, or this or that. And then once I really got to process my story, I was like, you know what? I didn't even have to do those kinds of things. But one thing that stood out to me was like my dad, after when I was a kid, him and my mom got into this horrible fight. And, you know, I don't know if I should even be saying that on podcast, but anyways, it got very violent. And on the way back, he said, you know, he said, but my childhood name is Mitch, by the way. So I'm named after my grandpa William Bear, so my family called me Mitch. But he said, you know, the truth is either gonna make you or it's gonna break you. So you're either gonna speak the truth, you know what I mean, but or you can be dishonest. So like he was basically telling me not to tell anybody, not to tell my grandma, not to tell anybody about what I had seen. And of course, me being a little kid, I went to my grandmother and I told her because this was frightening to me. I couldn't believe it. I lost my mom. She ran away after that night, things like that. And she, as soon as that happened, she confronted him and he tore a strip from me. And I was very young, and I just remember saying to myself, you know, that's right. The truth never really gets you anything good in this life because you get punished in this life for the truth, which kind of we switched that around. But I think our whole society is built on that aspect of punishing the truth. And it took a long time to get my truth and my honor back. And it was like through the 12 steps and the program, and Wellbriety. that I got my honor back. And now that I have it, it's so empowering because I can stand in my truth and my whole truth, my holy truth. And I feel very strong. And the thing is I have a belief that like the spirit of creation, one that grows all things, and we've talked about this and we've seen a lot of these things in science. I was just writing it down not long ago, some of those experiments that were very interesting standout experiments. But that, when we have bad energy, things that grow, creation or snowflakes, things like that kind of just start to slowly kind of crumble away, almost as if to repulse whatever is creating all this beautiful stuff, whatever is growing that. Like energy doesn't want to be around all of that kind of stuff. So I think being dishonoring yourself is a delusion because the whole spirit, Manatu, as we call them, will still understand what the real truth is, even if we deny that truth. And I think that's kind of where we're pushing ourselves back. Like I believe that the Great Spirit, Manatu, is always trying to push us back to the one truth. And we hear about that in the Bible as well, like the one truth that it talks about. And we just have so many of these false narratives. And I believe that that's where we're going. I feel like almost a force is trying to push us back to that whole rounded being where we can honor the ugly, the big, the bad, the ugly, and that our leaders can do that too. Another thing too is when we were talking about the era of enlightenment and Greeks and stuff, they would state that men had to be able to take care of their bodies or be able to be strong, because in order to have a good, healthy body, you would have a good, healthy mind. And you would be able to, if you could take care of yourself, you could take care of the populace in politics. Boundaries to our existence in life. And I feel like a lot of people want to surpass these boundaries, as I did in my addiction. There is a way to live that is harmonious with ourselves and all others. And I feel like we don't allow that to our leaders. We feed them into this position of cesspool, and they burden all our hatred. Like a lot of people threaten them and burden them in our hatred, and like whatever Donald Trump, like I feel also partly like we are to blame in a sense because we built Donald Trump. We made Donald Trump into who he is just by spewing hatred or promoting his hatred or this or that. And, I believe at the end of the day, he's forced to act the way he is because he has no other way to act, because he probably does have a large past that he can't honor or own or come out with. He probably really struggles with the inner confliction, and that's not a good thing. I think we see that a lot, but we need to create an environment not only as a people but for our leaders. I think as a people we need to create an environment for our leaders to be good communicators, and that means not condemning them when they do talk the truth or tell the truth. Like if we're also part of the political body and we're a part of that environment, and we need to protect our leaders as much as they protect us. And I don't think we've been really doing that. We've been lashing out because of our suffering, and they embody that energy that we throw out at them. They start to probably, I would assume, us as less than or careless, or they're just a bunch of riffraff or whatever a person would have to tell themselves to cope with the amount of stress that they're dealing with. These are kind of my understandings of leadership, dishonor, dishonesty, and leadership. Yeah.
The leaders are definitely, there's a reflection of the populace. I mean, we vote for them. So there's that, but it seems to go even deeper than that into a zeitgeist sort of phenomenon. And it's kind of led by the will of the people to a degree. Donald Trump is actually, and that's partly why, an aspect of him that I appreciate, Donald Trump being an example of somebody, while he's in the position of power, like he's so specific in his agenda and intention, and he's unwavering in that. It just happens to be a value system that comes from a society, that we're all a part of to a degree, that has a sickness, right? So you get a leader who obviously has the same sickness as a society because he comes from the society, and there's an expectation for him to right the ship, to get us off that trajectory. And it's an unrealistic expectation. And I think that other politicians, and where I was going with this earlier, is that they've been to theater school longer, in a sense, where they know how to play the good guy better. And Donald Trump just doesn't know how to play the good guy. And sure, he has a checkered past, and we all do. And to the degree of that checkered past, I don't really know. But it would still be symptomatic of the society. And so now we're in this position, and here you're educating yourself in sociology, and you've come from experiences of, very significant suffering, where there's been significant disease within your family and as well as the culture. And it's gotten into your bloodstream, and then now you've gotten it out. and you're able to see, for all intents and purposes, right? And I know we walk this road, very delicately, this path very delicately. But how do we get leadership in place that does have the value system? How do we get the populace to see the people who are walking with integrity and to seek them out and ask them to be leaders? Because it's the people that are vying to be leaders that are obviously the problem, because they come from the same disease around lack of self-esteem and needing the external world to validate their existence and to be triumphant within that external validation, where obviously you want a leader who doesn't operate that way, that operates internally and doesn't care about leadership, the success of what comes with it, the wealth that comes with it, doesn't care about any of that. In fact, doesn't want to be a leader, probably, but they're identified as the leader that we need, and they may have to. It's like in screenwriting, you call that the reluctant hero. So there's many films that are that reflect that archetype. So storytellers of the world, we know about this. Carl Jung knows about this, but for it to become our reality is very different. Or do we give up altogether on the populace, on the greater, the cultural, the sociological phenomenon before us, that is our cities, that is our country, that is our population? And do we head for the hills with our village and start small, work on ourselves and work on our children, make sure that our children are deemed to be sacred and treated as though they're sacred, as well as any earthly beings that are young, that come from that youthful state, and they're revered in terms of their innocence, but also their connection to Creator, but their connection to the quantum soup that we're all a part in, it's like my infant understands life in a way that I only get to understand, if I get to understand it to that level at all, when I go into the throes of ceremony and I'm fully surrendered. With ayahuasca, does that for me. It's able to disassemble the mechanistic sort of nature of the cerebral realm of notions of identity, of external identification, and completely get rid of them within the ceremony, and to allow something to emerge, something from within. And then, in my daily life, as I integrate both. I integrate the external world back in, but from a place of a little more knowing and nurturing within. And the Sundance does that also. It tears apart those belief systems and that identity structure to the core. And so I guess there's a couple of questions in there for you. Is like, have you given up on, the 7-8 billion people that are populating the planet and feel like it's just important to focus on the small village? Or is there a middle ground? And are we salvageable? Like, how do we get out of this? How do we find a leader and leaders within our communities that are going to help right the ship? And is it already happening? There.
I like your final point there, because you know what? Is it already happening? Heck yes, it is. And I have to remind myself that a lot. At the beginning of my journey, I had to listen to a lot of success stories just to kind of remind myself, oh yeah, you know what? It's not just me. And now when I go to Sweat and Prayers, I'm thinking, Creator, all the people who stand strong in commitment to you, may you give them strength, because it's not just me or you. It's so many other people who are fighting because they have kids. I fight for my babies back home. I let people have kids. They want a future, and there's no reason we shouldn't have a future. And I'm a person who, because I'm a suicide, I'm a terminal addict. I've tried to kill myself many times in the past, and I feel probably I came close to death a couple times, putting myself into a hospital during my addiction. But it came to a revelation that last time after I had won my sexual assault court case and stuff, because when you were kind of talking a little bit about that one point was, I got to talk to the person who hurt me, and he did say, don't let that darkness get a hold of you. And I remember that, because I've had to fight for that darkness for a long time. But kind of going back, I have never really got to meet a man who wasn't addicted to substance growing up. And now for me to be a man, it was on that last day when I was gonna take my life. It was near Christmas, was homeless. This was before going to Mount Royal. and I was giving up, and I thought to myself, I had whatever there, what I was going to use. And, I had my little nephew in the next room, and I thought to myself, you know what? A fury came over me, actually, to tell you the truth. I was like thinking to myself, you know what? After everything that has happened to me, and I'm going to let my babies go through this world without me, and I'm going to give up. So I get goosebumps when I think of that moment because, it's like a moment between me and Creator where it was like, no, like you need to stand for them now. And that's what I've been doing ever since. And I'm a big believer now in I will die trying because the other side isn't really an option. It's not an option for me to give up on anybody or any billions of people. We're all in this together. I will die trying. That's where I go with that because I won't let those kids go through what I had to go through. When we talked about the forsaken children of creation and how I felt like that would be me doing that to them. And because I'm knowing and because I've gone through my experience, I feel that if I had killed myself or I had given up on people or my family, that I would even be worse than the people who are devouring these people, devouring all things. I would be worse than that because I know in my heart that there's a way out. So back to your question, I do believe that we can do this together. I believe it is happening. I believe that yes, we do need a sacred village. We need multiple sacred villages for sure. We need to start from the beginning, start from what really is healthy, start from growing being with nature creation, start with the basics, start with learning how to protect ourselves, start with exposure to like if there is a creator, there is a desecrator. You have to see both sides in order to see the light and the dark, which makes the full picture. You can't just like biblical sense. You can't just focus on just the light and condemn the darkness because if you do that, you're blind to the darkness. And that's one thing that I've learned in my recovery and in my experience is that if you are being hunted by a wolf, you need to be able to look at that wolf, study that wolf, and learn how that wolf moves, or you can be attacked by it in any way or means, right? So to hunt what hunts us, to move what moves us is a big part. And I think that the children, like Richard Freeman kind of said, that we're coming into the era where science meets sacred. And I really, really like that because I think now in 2025, we're starting to really talk about what is religion, what is our nature, what is creation, what is the children, what does all of this mean to us? What are we working towards? What is science without the holy? What is the holy without the science? As I'm studying research and stuff now, I think we're kind of starting to see that. We were talking about how, people, PhDs, man's best, would go in and take skin grafts of First Nations kids up north without even talking to them or getting consent. So we see what science is without the holy, the disconnect, and this is man's best, when we disconnect, when we're doing these Frankenstein projects, and what it can be when we connect, we can build these amazing cities, we can build all this stuff. We're not really without resources. We're not really out of food. We're not really out of anything. We just built a system that can't sustain the amount of people that we have. Like at the end of the day, we should be able to give everybody a job, and everybody's job should be deemed equal. Give like the passion. And I know a lot of people think, oh, that's a pipe dream, but I mean, is it? Are we kind of working towards that? Because I mean, you just can't have meaningless people because like the meaning of the spirit embodied within each and every one of us. I mean, we all have a purpose to be here. We all have a movement. We all have something we're moved to. And I think, yeah, so going back to that, the sacred village, just starting from the get-go, being able to come into the city, being able to see true suffering. I like the paradox of polarization that's happening right now within political aspects, within all aspects of, I think that there's a great polarization happening. But being able to go to the streets, being able to understand people, being able to help suffering, being able to see us all as equal, that was a huge turnover for me. Being able to see things without a hierarchy was big for me because, yeah, it's just people are suffering no matter if they're me or this person or on the streets or if they're in a $1 billion mansion, like when we're talking about white collar psychopathy or stuff like, how many billionaires have lost their families and just really regret that. Like, there's just a lot of things money can't buy. There was this man in Japan who lost his daughter to cancer, and he built thousands of statues trying to replicate her, and that's really hurting because he's segregated from the populace. And that's something that we see with people and with wealth is when they have wealth, they're isolating themselves and putting themselves further away when they should be here with the problem. So once we can kind of just bring everybody in and say, hey, it's all good, you can come walk with us and talk with us. There is no condemning wells. There is no condemning these guys or these guys. I think we'll be okay. Like we'll get there because we want solutions, and I think we're just kind of combating the madness of people who are disconnected because without the delusion of dishonor creates a fantasy that people want to be real. I think a lot of people want this fantasy to be real. We want to think that, oh, like what we're dealing with right now, and I know I'm throwing a lot of information, but it's kind of like a deprogression because we don't want to progress because we know that progressing, like, Donald Trump says, woke is broke. So we don't want to progress. We want to stay here. And I think that there's like the two polarizing forces that are pushing on each other. But, at the end of the day, yeah, I think once we just kind of come down to that normal place and we just kind of talk it out. It doesn't have to be this way. Money doesn't have to be everything. And yeah, I don't know, we'll be okay. We'll be okay. We have to. And even if we're not,
Mhm.
at least the people who are here together helping each other will be okay. Because if there's one revelation that I had in all my, even my suicide attempts and my addiction, it is a good time to be good with Creator. It is a good time to be good with Creator right now more than ever. Right now, during all of this chaos and turbulence, it's a good time to be good with the Great Spirit because creation is suffering around us, and like the Tibetan monks said when I went to go and talk to them and pray, it's not just about prayers for us as a people, it's about prayers for us as plants, as water, as animals, all of that, and all of that feels, all of that suffers with us in our suffering. All of it suffers with us. So we need to ease the suffering together.
Do you think that the suffering of Indigenous people, as it seems to be amplified in a certain way at this time, is specifically because of the displacement and of the trauma that's happened at the hands of colonialists? Or is it broader than that? Are the Indigenous people in their nature, in their DNA, spiritually more connected to the earth by way of a spiritual karmic contract or calling, where they maybe metaphorically have deeper roots than people who are not Indigenous, not of the land? And so when the land is suffering, so are they, whether they grew up healthy or not. What do you think?
That's an interesting question because the first thing that came up is when I went through my studies is, the indigenous culture helped me so much with the stuff that they held, like the seven sacred teachings. First and foremost, I consider the indigenous people the last first people, meaning that they were the last first people to go under hierarchy and land claims because they didn't believe in any of this. They didn't believe in the owning of creation, but societies under a hierarchy did for a long time. So I consider the First Nations people the last first people. The thing is they were going through all of this horrific stuff. And I just remember hearing a story because I'm from Meadow Lake, and it was about the Battleford River, and it ran red with the blood of First Nations people. And I was kind of wondering why did the river run red? Like, being a kid and kind of thinking about all of this, and now thinking about it in a sociological aspect and what I know now, that final stand because we couldn't threaten the already threatened men. And that they kept these teachings, these very harmonious teachings throughout all this strife, all this pain, all this sorrow. And they just kept these things almost as if to say is once all this chaos comes, we're going to need to keep these teachings, these ceremonies, to remind people who they are, that they are going to have to suffer together. And it's through that suffering together that we're going to be able to, be able to renew ourselves, to kind of come back alongside of people, the colonialists, because the colonialists are suffering too. They're hurt too. They came here, like colonialism came here, and I was just at the archives the other day, and one thing that kind of stood up in residential school, actually a lot of women had spoke up about the damages that were being done to Indigenous kids, but because they were women, they weren't heard. They were kind of stuffed and all those things that were done kind of stuffed away. And that's kind of just what I heard from one archivist who studied the original papers. And so I just thought that was really interesting because it was really this big disbalance of men and women and all the stuff that kind of came here that really led to all of this hierarchy state, this patrilineal patriarchy. So yeah, going back to that, I think it's really fascinating that the indigenous people held on to that because for me, I feel like the indigenous people hold the spark of hope, but it's not just for Canada and in the United States, but also in the Amazon, also in places in Africa and in India and in China, even down to the Tibetan monks. I mean, like I got to spend time with the Tibetan monks and hear their stories about how they were displaced by China and what they're doing to fight and keep their culture in a place like Canada, and still doing their prayers as monks and as education here. I got to go to an event where the chiefs in Calgary got to meet Tibetan monks that came here, and we got to talk about the similarities between our cultures being displaced rather than talking about our differences. And it was just like really heartwarming. So it is the indigenous people of all lands, and we are fighting consumerism. The idea that we've built a construct of consumerism to consume all of creation is a disease in itself. This is what a disease does. It consumes its host until there is nothing left. But within that, a disease can learn to be an immune system. And I think that that's kind of slowly where we are working our way towards it. Now we can start, now we know what the disease is. We can understand it. We can work with it, not condemn it, but understand it as a natural reaction. Then we can turn it into something harmonious, like the immune system to our host. And then from there, we could probably reach the stars. Who knows where we could go? But it's hope and it's beautiful. And it was because the indigenous people that held a little bit of spark, but not just them, all people. Yeah.
But everybody plays a role, and it might have to do with your skin color and your lineage, or it might not. It kind of depends on your unique contribution to the world, but there is a pattern. Like people that come to ceremony, indigenous people that come to ayahuasca, and ayahuasca comes from Peru. What I've observed is that they're often led to their own tradition. So they're led back to their roots, and they're led towards healing that. And so people who are quote unquote settlers, or their roots are often further away, and that's not the case. So they're led to form communities with each other to start something new that doesn't, because their roots aren't here. And so it's a different, and there's crossover and there's collaboration, but as a pattern, as that I've noticed, that's the pattern, is that people that have indigenous roots are led back there, and those who don't are meant to plant new roots in the same way. In an ostensibly an indigenous way, but it's different because, these are colonized people that come from a different part of the world. Like, they're displaced people, they're orphans in a sense, when you get, in the context of having a colonial construct that they no longer fit in once they start to decolonize themselves through this medicine and through these ceremonies. And so, yeah, there's a collaboration that happens. But I think that, as things evolve, and as white people, or white's even a little bit too narrow, because it's not that narrow. It's like, it's more just assimilated people who are becoming decolonized and don't have indigenous roots in the place that they live. And many of them were born there, so they do have roots. They're just very, very young. But their role, though, where I was going with this, what I'm seeing is that it's a little bit different than the people who have the indigenous roots that are local. It's a different role. It's a different different medicine that's being carried, different wisdom that's being carried intentionally, for there to be some differentiation and collaboration. But differentiation, it's not going to be, we're all going to join together in one big, happy, multicolored tribe and live more in an indigenous way. There is differentiation in the roles. And with crossover, there's always examples that are going to prove, that are going to be exceptions to the rule, just to keep us on our toes, because that's a part of creation's wisdom too, is to make sure that there are anomalies, that we don't get stuck in any thought patterns and think that we've got it figured out. But that's happening with or without the, let's say, the broader population, as I see it. But there's a lot of influence from the assimilated culture at large, including nuclear weapons. Obviously, that can have an impact on the lives of indigenous people. Even if you're remote up in the mountains, isolating yourselves, you can still get affected by a nuclear winter. So which brings us in principle through in the arms of creation, and through that master plan, God's plan, so to speak, we can see that we're all connected, no matter whether we like it or not. So.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, just with that too, because I used to be really afraid of all that kind of stuff too, and like, just listening to the story of the nuclear history. Well, I don't know, you talk about so much, and I just want to jump all over the place.
Do it, yeah. Just let's go with it.
So we talked about the nuclear, and then we talked about so the logistics patterns for culture and stuff, so that we kind of come back to the land. And I think that was a big part, is that when we have people coming over here, and once we reconnect to the land, we'll become part of the land without the logistics bringing in things from China. So we'll kind of recreate culture, even when it is multicultural. Like, in 100 years, they say scientifically, there's not going to just be one race or another. It's going to be so amalgamated that we're just going to be one people. And I can't wait for that day to come. But the other part of that, because I'm jumping and speaking speedily, so the nuclear part, just knowing that, there's been events during nuclear holdings. I'm just recalling that moonlight bounced off the clouds, and it looked like three nuclear missiles were coming to the United States, and it actually stopped the World War at that time too from happening. But because that's how delicate this phase is. But just that how that thought crossed his mind, to hold on because this doesn't make sense, and that's how I feel like creation kind of protects us. And I was just looking at my book. Sorry, just one sec. And I love looking at these kinds of experiments. PNG, it was created in, I believe, in an Asian country, but there is a random number generator in a room with a light and four boxes. And this light goes in all four corners, and it's a random light generator. But as soon as you put a plant into one quadrant of that corner, that light doesn't become random anymore. It starts to focus more on wherever that part of light is. And we're starting to see more and more experiments like this. And I
Mm,
think it's called
mm,
PNG experiment.
mm,
But things aren't as random as they seem. Random number generators
mhm,
were all around the world, and when something catastrophic happened, like the death of Diana, the random number generators started to act differently. They weren't random anymore. They actually, when there was great suffering, we could start seeing patterns in number and random generators that focus
mm,
more on supporting life. And I think that's an important aspect because when we do Sundance, it brings that spirit, but it's no longer,
mhm,
it's no longer random when there's suffering, when there's things like that. We do have the focus of the higher power,
mm,
and I think that's when we're talking about Richard Freeman, where science meets sacred. We are starting to
mhm,
see these connections, and it's really
mhm,
fascinating because 2025, what we are is
mhm,
we're celestial beings in the universe, and we come from one source, one point of creation. And I mean, we are very sacred, and I feel like because we've demeaned the spirit so much in desecration that this is a reaction from that. We've lost meaning. As soon as we tap into that meaning, like I believe you have and a lot of other people have, we start to see we belong to the stars. We don't want to do this
mhm,
because this is a means to an end, right? Like what we're seeing is a means to an end. And then I think it's best not to panic. Like I like what Barack Obama says too a lot. It's about just maintaining a calm because a lot of people are working on it, and just yeah, we're doing this together. And just being calm is the biggest thing because the enemy, well, I don't like to call them the enemy, but usually speak in terms of hyperbolical and very urgent. Like it is very urgent that we get fluoride into the water stream is a big example for me. It's urgent because we have to get these dentals. Dental went up over 400%. But little did they talk about that we actually only consume about 1% of water. The rest of it's actually getting flushed down into the rivers, into the Mohkinstsis, and that fluoride is on multiple products from the United States. So we're actually getting about a lot larger. It's actually in everything. So those are when we're talking about urgency, we need to maintain calm because political urgency means it's time to slow down.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Yeah, it's a bit of a quantum soup, as they say. Like there's so many, it's a moving mosaic. There's so many moving parts. But when you break it down into that story of Diana and the grieving, it's like there's that energy is like a signal that goes out that's connecting to multiple people. Because I think we were speaking about this earlier. I think this was before the show started, before the podcast started, that suffering gets us closer. In my experience, suffering gets me closer to
Mhm,
prayer. So if I'm suffering
mhm,
and if I get out of the head, the stories into my body, into prayer, I realize that I'm already halfway to like a state of meditation, of connection, that I'm already so close. Like if I'm sick and like if I get quite sick with the flu, the veil's very thin. It's like when you're hallucinating from a fever, that's when it's at its thinnest to the unconscious, but also to the spirit world, in my experience. Makes the
mhm.
veil very thin. So it makes sense if you have the more suffering there is, the more attention there is to prayer, the more attention there is, I don't know, to a collective sort of beacon, like smoke signal. So we're there
Yeah.
to protect each other, protect ourselves with that intuition. There's also the influence of there was a test on the morphic resonance where a class did a test, and then another group came in, and the part of this experiment was to see if they would improve, having had a group of students having just done the test previously. And because of the energy in the brainwave and the intelligence that was circulating, not just in the mind and in the body, but outside of it, that it made an impact. There was a resonance that was left over as this one group of students left, and then another group came in. So I might be getting the specifics incorrect, but I'm communicating the gist of the experiment and that it was factual. This was scientific. So there's so much, to be curious about, I suppose. I've kind of lost interest in all that stuff. It's kind of fun to think about, but I'm so steeped in the spiritual side of things that I'm connecting to ancestors and different spirits, and, that's as my vocation. So it's like the science side kind of loses interest. I've lost interest in that because my reason for doing or being interested in the arts and in filmmaking and storytelling was because I was lost. It was an existential arrest. I was looking for something bigger and I found it. So then I still love stories, but the urgency around them and how important they are to my life. I don't have role models that I'm sort of making up or attaching to people out there, like different writers or directors or whatever, needing those people to be the people that are helping me regulate in the world and helping guide my life. I don't need that anymore. So by the grace of God. With that in mind, we do have help, I guess. We can, working on our villages, the more that we work on ourselves. And I guess, a big point here is, that I wanted to make is that, that urgency around, or the lack of urgency that comes from suffering, like somebody dies, and that the collective can gather around and feel this heartache, then improvements can kind of happen, connections can start to happen. An Indigenous child is found on the side of a river and communities come together weeping, something is sort of like stirring, somebody gets angry, we got to make a difference, and then they start to get out of bed a little bit earlier and start to make a difference. Like this is by design. Like these horrifying situations and phenomenon, they happen in order to propel us back into our path, back into, being in alignment and right relationship with creation. But if we can cultivate our villages in that sacred way by doing ceremony and integrating the young, considering them to be sacred, teaching them about the sacred, the elder teachings being passed down when they're young, bringing them into ceremony, seeing them being able to witness and being taught that ceremony is vital, because I believe that it makes the horror stories, that we're all familiar with, not essential, because we're already in that vibration. We're already in alignment. But the further that we get out collectively out of alignment, we have to be brought back in. And we're at a very unique time where the spiritual push, the spiritual, I want to say impetus, but the spiritual catalyst that's required to get the world back on track, because it's so, vastly out of alignment. It's going to, what I see coming and what's coming in visions for me is that it's going to be something pretty significant, and it's going to be a wake up. We've already had COVID, which was significant, but there'll be something else, and it's not necessary if everybody collectively is honoring the sacred and doing ceremony, because we're already in alignment with that vibration and with creation. And if you get too many people out of their hearts, you're going to have catastrophe. And I don't think the spirit world's going to let that happen, but they're going to help us, and they're going to do it the easy way or the hard way, and they're happy to do it either way. Right. So, we can speak on that, but before we end the session here, though, I do want to ask you about life as a university student. Is it as corrupt and a left-wing ideology, what does Jordan Peterson say, like the left-wing feminist ideology that's bringing us all, that's breaking us all down and going to turn us into fascists before we know it? What's it like being in an institution that is teaching you, that educating you, but is still an institution that is part of a colonial construct, even though it's pretending it's not, it's pretending it's liberated? But how can you have people that are actually still the walking wounded, liberating other people, because they think they are, even though they're still traumatized? That's the question that I have ultimately. Like, how do you feel about that whole package?
Yeah, for sure. That's a big package. First and foremost, first and foremost, I think it's important to understand that the institution that we're working with is a process in development, whether it wants to believe it or not. Yes, I mean, the institution has a place to be, the opportunity, or it could be an amazing, amazing place, but I think that there's a lot of restrictions under it. I find, I have nothing but to be grateful for it, because, the institution at this era has taught me who I am and who my family is, where I come from. It taught me history. And even though the university itself is very reactive, like most other institutions, it's very reactive instead of thinking proactive, where we're going, where we need to be, instead of
like
let's
Obama,
just be studying what
and be calm before we make the decisions, right?
Yeah, be calm and before we make the decisions. But there's a lot that's perpetuating like, because you said it, the colonial response, but I'm coming in an era right now where the university allows me to, kind of work on a reduced course load while I'm working on my addictions, where I can go in for testing in a separate room because I'm so energy sensitive to other students who are under extreme amounts of stress. I'm learning about Indigenous culture in a way that I've never learned before, and that's one of the biggest reasons I came to Calgary. So the university, it does have a ways to go. And there's, it's not perfect because it's a public institution. We just had a professor, if you say that much, but we just had a person not long ago kind of talk about how we should, in a class before I got into the class, just before my class started, and he was talking about how we should privatize everything, like, and this is a professional opinion that we should privatize all of our provincial parks, because privatize all these provincial parks and everything and all the land, they're going to take care of it, and that's the only way we're going to protect animals. And he made the change being like the difference between the cow not going extinct versus the elephant. If we could privatize all the elephants and stuff like that, we would have a lot of elephants. So that was their understanding, which I don't believe in, because, but some people really hold on to capitalism to a T, and that's fine for them. I think that's an internal, my personal opinion is that's eternal suffering, but
Mm-hmm.
um, so I come in from a sociologist aspect. I come in from a very underfunded program. Nobody wants these sociological corrections because, like I said, I believe that we are in like that place. No, we don't want to progress too much because we're going to start losing profits. So for me, being a sociologist and an addict, I'm already coming in with, I come in with these ideas like, no, it just doesn't have, like, the biggest, if I could sum up my life, there's addict, there's people who came here from Belarus, there's people who are Cree First Nations, the Niiyaowas, the Niiyaw First Nations. That life didn't have to be this way. Being sexually abused, the addictions, or using alcohol and stuff as a rite of passage, and advertising the heck out of it and normalizing it to a point where consumerism is normal instead of just being at peace and at present with self. And, so working around those things, I think academia can be a beautiful, beautiful place once that science meets sacred, but it is behind, and I think it is lacking a little, but I'm very happy where I'm at today because it's giving me the opportunity to grow, and I can be part of a research group, and, I can kind of help out with that. So I think we're growing. We are growing. So it's all good things.
Totally. And you're able, like you were sharing before, you're able to go to a sweat, you're able to do ceremony. If the culture is keeping people from doing that, we have a problem. But so long as that's
Right.
fine, like I've been able to spend the last 10 years working on decolonizing myself within a colonized construct, and nobody's like telling me don't do that. I have, friends and family that have taken a step back from me because I scare them because, I do ritual and ceremony and stuff like that, and it's just too much for their heads, but there's nothing overt, that's out of, for that side is just human beings dealing with the emotion that's coming up in their body and not knowing how to compartmentalize it and deal with it. And so they project it out into the world, but that's just happening all day long anyways. So there's no oppression for me, and I think that word oppression is also very, very key, very important word to be calm and to, take a step back and to determine what's real. And if we're actually being oppressed, because I know that it's very easy to, a part of that colonized construct that comes into the mind, like psychologically speaking, is to identify as a victim. It comes part and parcel with being segregated from your birthright to that spiritual connection and the wisdom of the grandmothers and all of these things that we've been taken away from, and we're put into boxes. We're categorized and sent on our way with limiting belief systems about ourselves and a lack of self-worth, and and so we're scared shitless. And so if we can identify as a victim, at least something makes sense. But how often are we really a victim of the external world in relation to our own minds, which is a part of that colonization trickster? But, I can, go down that route. Navigate.
Yeah.
Any closing words, sociologist Will?
Well, just to
Sociologist
say,
in the
with
making?
one of the biggest in the making, I thank you so much for the time that you made for me today. It's awesome being able to speak these things in a place that accepts these things. I do want to just kind of bring up, because I was training to be a psychologist, and to talk about the oppression from the mind versus the sociology oppression, which there are definitely two kinds. The other part too is chemical oppression. And I think that's what we're really dealing with severely right now is chemical oppression. And there's going to be a lot of products that we have to understand, like, in my research, understanding that the products that we use every day, what are the byproducts of those things and how are they
Uh-huh.
getting fed back to us? So chemical oppression is a
Yeah,
big one because it is the undoing of creation. So that oppression
totally.
does affect with the mind, all the other stuff. So I like focusing on the chemical oppression first. And I heard a friend say that those words together, and I was like, that resonates so well with what we're dealing with right now.
Yeah.
But by knowing these things, we can move forward in a good way. By speaking these things, you found a way to, and like you said, once we get people who are more accepting, we ease them into it. Because I mean, like, they're very frightened. A lot of people are very frightened. I think about their environmental and emotional encasing. What do they experience in a day-to-day basis? And a lot of people don't experience much because we are spiritually segregated, we are socially segregated, we're sexually and age segregation. Lots of segregation still go on, and just with our language and labeling alone. And that really puts people in a hard rock and a hard spot because moving forward, I want to be able to honor us as and this will be kind of like my closing statement, but honoring us as our wisdom grows because when we talk about how old somebody is, I don't even like using that anymore. I think that instead of saying how old somebody is, like how many celestial solar rotations are you? I know it's a lot of syllables, but just saying that because bringing honor back to wisdom where the youth used to look up to us because right now everybody is looking at the youth because of the spiritual starvation, wanting to be young, wanting to be this and all that. But the youth don't have guidance and they need us. They need our guidance. They need our wisdom and we should be revered. But there's a lot of people also who do age in a place that I don't believe that the spirit wants people to be in. So, some
Hmm.
jobs, some things, and it's really hard because they need our prayers too. But to be able to bring reverence back to wisdom, back to our experience by speaking what we're speaking here today, by building that sacred village, by going through this, because we are the warriors, like we still hold the scars of these past, and by guiding the youth and yeah, making them strong. Like, I kind of talk about that too because there's some teachers who kind of are jealous of, the youth, but I think a good teacher wants their student to surpass them. And I think that that's the way we should be moving forward in this life. I want all these children to surpass me. And by that, I need to be my best self. As one man said, a philosopher deserving our respect must preach by example. So by that statement, we have to be our best selves so that they can surpass us and even be better. And I think that that's the genetic code, that's the creation code, that's how we move forward in a good way. And by
Hmm.
learning, archiving this, and putting this chapter of desecration to sleep eventually in a reasonable way. It's not going to go away, but in a balanced way, returning to that
Hmm.
balance, right? Because there has to be the three forces. But I think you know that
Hmm.
as well. So that would be kind of my closing statement, anyways, as we're going, moving forward.
Hmm. Cool. Thank you. Yeah, well said. Well, thanks, Will Bear. Really appreciate you being on the podcast. It was a really lovely conversation. I'll see you again soon, I'm sure, soonish in ceremony at the this summer at the very least, I suspect. And if not, we'll be in each other's lives. So,
That sounds really good. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here and keep working on that sacred village. And I'm sure that
yeah.
our paths will be intertwined.
Oh, okay. Back to the green light. This is Mark A. Lewis, Sacred Village podcast. Thank you very much to the listeners, people that have taken the time to listen to this episode with Will Bear, a sociologist in the making, who's had a life that has shown him rock bottom, shown him what that means, and has ascended from that in such a good way. And this man's going to be a part of the solution. It's very clear. So over and out.
I lay my head down.
Check out my lovely partner's music, Kristina Jessen, at KristinaJessen.com. And there's also more information on what we're doing. We're doing a land project up here, traditional land development with a community intention. And if you're interested in any of the retreats that we're a part of and part of organizing, you can find all that information at sacredvillagepodcast.com. Have a wonderful day.
Floating down.